He slept on the floor of a church. No pillow, no blanket, just a wooden pew for a roof and the soft hum of a broken ceiling fan overhead. He was 13, not in the way movies show it. Not with wide eyes and braces and comic books. 13. The way America makes it for boys no one comes back for. His mother had left 2 nights earlier. No note, no promise, just silence and a carton of milk half full in the fridge, now warm and sour. The neighbors didn't knock. They had seen this kind of exit before. And the state, they had a list to work through. Mike Johnson waited one more night before packing what little he owned into a duffel bag once used for Bible camp. And then he walked. For miles. Shoes too thin for concrete, too soaked for dignity. He reached the church just before midnight. The pastor didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. The look in the boy's eyes said enough. Not fear, not sadness. Just the blank stare of someone no longer expecting to be chosen. That night he found a spot behind the altar, curled his knees to his chest and closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He didn't cry. He just listened. To the wind rattling the windows. To the faint crackle of an old radio left on in the pastor's office. To the sound of his own breath, shallow, steady, determined. That's when he remembered the bag. Not the one he carried. The one his grandmother left him before she passed. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. Inside was a scarf, a church bulletin from 1972, and a folded piece of paper yellowed by time. He opened it slowly, expecting a grocery list or an old hymn lyric. But it wasn't that. It was one line, written in blue ink. Careful cursive, a tremble in the first word. You must study the law to protect people like me. He read it again, and again, and again, until the words weren't just ink. They were command, calling, promise. That night on the floor of a church in rural Louisiana, a boy with no home, no family, no reason to believe in tomorrow, became something more than a statistic, more than a ward of the state. He became an oath, a vow in bare feet and bruised hope. He didn't know the road ahead, didn't know how long it would take, but he knew this. He would learn the law, and he would never, never let someone like his grandma be invisible again. Before Mike Johnson stood behind a podium, he stood in food bank lines. Before he wore a suit, he wore the same jeans 4 days in a row, careful not to bend too hard at the knees so the holes wouldn't split wider. Before he debated law, he debated hunger and loneliness, and whether hope was just something people with parents talked about. At 13, Mike became what the system calls displaced. Not dramatic enough for headlines, not tragic enough for documentaries. Just one more name on a clipboard, one more quiet exit from childhood. He bounced between a short-term foster home and the church that kept the lights on late enough to feel like safety. The pastor let him sweep the floor and sleep in the back when there wasn't a better option. Most nights Mike didn't ask for help. He asked for space. He'd take old legal pads from the office drawer, flip them to a blank page, and copy passages from the church library's Bible. Not out of faith, not yet, but out of rhythm, out of routine. It made the hours feel like they meant something. One night he copied a verse from Proverbs. He didn't even know why. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. He stared at that sentence for almost an hour. Something about it didn't feel like advice. It felt like an assignment. But assignments require tools, and Mike didn't have any. No ride to school, no lunch money, no working alarm clock, no one to sign the permission slips or help with homework. What he had was a bag with 3 shirts, 2 books, and that note from his grandmother, the one she wrote before she died of a stroke, while waiting 9 hours in an underfunded rural clinic. That note became his backbone, folded and refolded, tucked into the spine of his Bible, like a secret only he was allowed to carry. And carry it he did, through late buses and part-time jobs, and the sideways glances from kids who knew his address didn't exist on a real street. He worked at a car wash after school, cleaned classrooms on weekends, helped the janitor at the courthouse just to sit near real lawyers to listen. He never asked questions, just observed, noticed. Which attorneys stayed late? Which ones greeted the janitor by name? Which ones spoke kindly to the families who looked nervous in their Sunday best? He kept notes on all of it, Not because he knew he'd follow that path, but because something inside him had already started walking. He wasn't trying to escape his past. He was studying it, so that one day maybe he could rewrite what it meant to grow up forgotten. Mike never blamed anyone. Not the mother who left, not the caseworker who forgot his birthday, not even the system that shuffled him from one shelter cot to another, like a pawn waiting for a player to notice. Blame was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed focus. He needed direction. He needed to survive one more day without letting the pain harden into resentment. So he trained himself to see every struggle as a skill set. Cold nights taught him how to plan. Empty kitchens taught him how to budget. Bullies in the hallways taught him how to read people fast. Each scar a syllabus. Each rejection a redirection. But the note, that one sentence from his grandmother, that was the compass. He didn't understand it at first. Why law? Why not ministry or medicine or politics? But every time he thought about what happened to her waiting alone, ignored because she didn't know the right number to call or the right words to say, he realized something. It wasn't that she didn't matter. It's that no one was obligated to protect her. Not unless the law said so. Not unless someone like him made it their mission to make it so. So Mike started reading everything he could about legal systems. Library copies of civil rights cases. Old newspaper clippings. Law review articles printed on dot matrix paper someone left in the church office. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the weight. He began to think like someone who could defend others, not someday, but soon. He memorized court procedures like scripture. He volunteered at the courthouse just to carry boxes. He watched the public defenders more than the prosecutors, because those were the ones who stood beside the forgotten. The ones who didn't get their names in headlines, but changed lives in silence. At night, back at the church, he'd write practice arguments on loose sheets of notebook paper. No one read them. That wasn't the point. The point was becoming fluent in strength. Not the kind that pushes, the kind that protects. By the time he turned 16, Mike had built his own quiet curriculum. He didn't ask the world for permission. He gave himself a mandate. And while other kids were dreaming of freedom, he was dreaming of justice. Not as an ideal, as a responsibility. Because the law to him wasn't about power. It was about insulation, a shield for the voiceless, a weapon for the weary, a structure for the scared. And if that meant he had to be the first one in his family to finish school, to apply for college, to enter a courtroom, so be it. He wasn't doing it for prestige. He was doing it for a woman who never got her day in court, and for every other woman who never will, unless someone like him stands up first. It was a cold night when he found the bag again. He hadn't meant to. He was just looking for a second pair of socks before walking to the church. It had been raining all day, and his shoes, bought second-hand soles barely hanging on, were soaked. In the back of the closet behind a torn hymn book and an old pair of choir robes sat the canvas bag. His grandmother's. He almost left it there. Too tired. Too wet. Too focused on getting through another evening curled up behind the altar, hoping the mice didn't chew through his only pair of jeans. But something pulled him. He reached in. A scarf. Faded lavender smelling faintly of menthol and dust. A church bulletin from years ago. And then a slip of paper, folded twice, yellowed along the creases. He unfolded it carefully, like it might disintegrate from memory alone. There it was. Her handwriting. Wobbling but deliberate, almost as if she knew it would need to survive a long journey. One sentence, 9 words. You must study the law to protect people like me. He read it, then read it again, then stopped breathing. He had always known his grandmother believed in him. But this wasn't belief. It was prophecy. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a torch passed down by someone who didn't get the justice she deserved, but still believed someone else could fight for it. Mike didn't sleep that night. He just sat there, soaked socks, cracked heels, aching knees, staring at the paper. Not because he needed more motivation, but because it gave him something he didn't know he'd lost. Permission to dream, to decide, to move forward as more than a survivor, as a student, a builder, a defender. That note didn't change his path. It named it. And in naming it, it gave him what no system had, a reason. He folded the note slowly, as if creases could erase the weight of the words. You must study the law to protect people like me. It wasn't a request. It was an inheritance. That night, Mike didn't pray for strength. He didn't ask for a miracle. He didn't fall asleep imagining someone would rescue him. He wrote a list. He tore a sheet from the back of a church bulletin and began scribbling on the floor by flashlight. What law schools are in Louisiana? How much do they cost? What GPA do I need? Who do I even ask? He had no answers. He barely had pencils that worked. But he had something stronger than certainty. He had direction. And when you've spent most of your childhood waiting for someone else to decide what happens to you, knowing what you want is its own kind of freedom. The next morning, he went to the public library before school. He didn't ask for help. He just wandered the aisles until he found a college prep guide from 1995. Dog-eared, torn, smelled like a church basement. Perfect. He checked it out and carried it like it was made of gold. He read all 398 pages in 4 nights in the storage room behind the choir loft, with a flashlight that flickered and died every hour. Then he read it again. He copied Timeline's application checklists, SAT vocab words. He made flashcards out of cereal boxes, cutting them into squares and writing on them with church donation pens. He memorized Latin legal terms under his breath while sweeping floors. He practiced mock interviews in front of a bathroom mirror, mimicking the voices of senators he heard on the radio. Each time he felt ridiculous, he reached for the note. Each time someone laughed at him for trying too hard, he reached for the note. Each time the world reminded him who he was supposed to be, poor, invisible, disposable, he reached for the note. Not for comfort, but for clarity. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was a plan. Because Mike wasn't building a fantasy, he was building a future. One paper cut at a time. One borrowed textbook at a time. One Sunday night spent recopying his resume by hand because the church printer was broken. This wasn't about beating the odds. This was about refusing to accept them. By the end of the semester, his teachers noticed. He stayed after class, asked hard questions, turned in assignments early. One teacher pulled him aside. "You've changed." He didn't explain. He didn't mention the bag, or the note, or the empty house. He just nodded. Because change doesn't always need to be announced. Sometimes it's just quiet momentum. The shift from maybe one day to, "I'm going." Mike wasn't waiting anymore. He was moving toward something bigger than survival, toward purpose. And that one line in faded blue ink, that line he read until it became part of his pulse, it didn't just guide him. It redefined him, not as a boy without a home, but as a man with a mission. The day he mailed his first college application, Mike didn't tell anyone. He had no one to tell. No father waiting in the kitchen. No mother asking what major he picked. No counselor reviewing his essay. Just a self-addressed envelope, a stamp he bought with leftover change, and a name he wrote in capital letters at the top, Michael Johnson. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like resistance. The kind that's built quietly, brick by brick, with no fanfare, no confetti, no applause. He walked the letter to the post office and dropped it into the slot with the slow, steady hands of someone who knew how much it had cost him to get there, and how much it would still cost. Because getting in wasn't the hard part. Staying in that was war. He got accepted to a small university in the state. No scholarship. Just a letter that said, "You're welcome to try." So he did. He packed everything he owned into one suitcase and one shoebox. He took the church's spare Bible and his grandmother's note, and he showed up on campus with 2 pairs of pants, 1 good shirt, and a hunger no one else could see. The first semester nearly broke him. He couldn't afford the textbooks. He worked 3 jobs. Cleaned dorm bathrooms at dawn, shelved books at the library in the afternoon, and wiped tables in the cafeteria at night. He studied in supply closets. He slept on top of his clothes because he couldn't afford bedding. He skipped meals to pay for print credits. No one knew his name, but the professors noticed his essays. They were sharp, clear, angry, in the way the best legal minds often are not out of ego, but out of deep moral frustration. One professor, a former civil rights attorney, handed him back a paper with just one comment. "You don't write like someone who wants an A. You write like someone who has something to prove." He did, But it wasn't about proving he belonged. It was about proving that his grandmother's story mattered. That she wasn't just a sad footnote in a forgotten zip code. She was the reason he stayed up past midnight studying tort reform. She was the reason he said no to parties, no to shortcuts, no to everything that made college easier but less urgent. He wasn't chasing prestige. He was chasing justice. And slowly, one case study at a time, he started to see it not as a vague concept, but as a tool. Justice, he realized, wasn't blind. It just needed better advocates. People who remembered what it felt like to be unseen. And if he had to be the first one through the door, so be it. He'd walk through and leave it open behind him. In his second year of college, things got worse before they got better. His part-time job at the cafeteria was cut due to budget changes. Rent on the shared apartment increased. His roommate moved out without warning, taking the deposit and leaving behind an unplugged fridge filled with spoiled food and flies. Mike came back from class one Friday evening, opened the front door, and gagged. He spent the next 3 hours cleaning every inch of that apartment by hand. No gloves, no bleach, just hot water, baking soda, and a stack of old rags the church janitor had given him months ago. He didn't complain. He didn't post about it. He just got to work. Because if life had taught him anything, it was this. No one was coming to clean up after him. Not in the apartment. Not in the courtroom. Not in the country. You want change? Get a rag. Start scrubbing. But the pressure was real. Assignments piled up. He fell behind in civil procedure. Missed a research deadline. Nearly failed a test on legal ethics because he hadn't slept in 2 days. His hands shook when he tried to write. His vision blurred during night lectures. The hunger came back. So did the fear. The kind he thought he'd buried, the kind from age 13, when he stared at the ceiling tiles of the church and wondered if tomorrow was still interested in him. But he didn't drop out. Didn't take a break. Didn't cut corners. Instead, he went to the courthouse, the one where he used to sweep floors. He walked in wearing a wrinkled shirt and shoes with thin soles and asked to speak with someone in legal aid. He told them the truth, that he was a full-time student with no income, no support, and a will to become the kind of lawyer the world keeps needing and never quite has enough of. The woman behind the desk paused. Then she said, "You ever considered volunteering here?" He said yes. The next Monday, he started organizing case files and transcribing interview notes. He stayed late, asked questions, learned how intake interviews worked. By mid-semester, the attorneys let him sit in on housing disputes and small claims court, not because they had to, because they saw something in him, something raw, something trained not in classrooms but in survival. Mike had never felt more certain. This was it. Not theory, not lectures, not practice tests. This was the work. This was what the note had been pointing to. And the note, by now worn thin, almost translucent from being folded and unfolded, stayed in his wallet right behind his student ID. He touched it before every shift. Not for luck. For alignment. To remind himself that he wasn't here because someone made room for him. He was here because he carved space out of concrete, with nothing but memory and intention. By the time he graduated, Mike wasn't the top of his class. He was something rarer. He was the one they remembered. Not for awards. Not for debate trophies. But for the fire he carried, slow-burning, never flashy, always steady. He applied to law school with no fallback plan. Wrote his application essay in the church basement, on a fold-up chair using a borrowed laptop with 3 missing keys. He didn't mention the hardships. He didn't write about his mother. He didn't even reference the church, or the hunger, or the janitor shifts. He wrote about justice, and the silence that follows when it doesn't show up. He got in. Barely. No scholarship again. Just a seat. But that was enough. He worked through the first year, like he always had, cleaning, volunteering, eating from discount bins, studying by lamplight. His reputation spread among professors. He asked the hard questions. Challenged outdated interpretations. Not to sound smart, but because the law was the only thing between people like his grandmother and the void. That was the year he got assigned his first real pro bono case. An elderly woman, living alone, scammed by a contractor who took her life savings and left her with holes in her roof and no heat for winter. Mike didn't hesitate. He met her at the clinic office and asked her one question before anything else. What's the thing you're most afraid of if we don't win? She didn't say money. She didn't say losing the case. She said that nobody will believe me. Mike didn't blink. He leaned forward, looked her in the eye, and said, "They will, because I do." And just like that, the note became a voice. He fought that case harder than any class paper he'd ever written. He worked nights, found witnesses, compiled documentation, tracked down the fraudulent contractor's previous victims. He didn't sleep more than 3 hours a night that month. But when the judge ruled in her favor, and she looked at him with tears she'd been holding for 20 years, he felt something crack wide open in his chest. Not pride, not relief. Purpose. Undeniable. Unshakable. This is what she meant. This is what the note was about. He wasn't just a law student anymore. He was a protector. A quiet sword. A legacy made flesh. And in that moment, just before he walked out of the courtroom, he reached into his wallet, unfolded the note again, and whispered, "I did it." Years later, when Mike Johnson stood at the lectern in the House of Representatives, he didn't lead with legislation. He led with a memory, not a speech, not a headline, just a moment. One that didn't make the news. One no camera ever caught. One that happened in silence but echoed for decades. He reached into his inside coat pocket, pulled out a small, clear sleeve. Inside it, a yellowed piece of paper, creased from 1,000 folds, protected now like an artifact. He held it up not high, not theatrically, but deliberately. And he said, "I carry this with me every day." He paused. People thought he was about to quote some historical figure, maybe cite a constitutional line or a presidential decree. But he didn't. He simply read it. "You must study the law to protect people like me." He let the sentence breathe. Let the room hold its weight. Then added, "My grandmother wrote that to me before I knew who I was, before I had a home, before I had a future." This sentence built one for me. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats. Some bowed their heads. 'Cause what do you say to that? What do you say to a man who became a leader, not through ambition, but through obligation to a legacy too personal to ignore? He didn't grandstand. He didn't pivot to party lines. He told them what it felt like to be invisible in your own country, to grow up with laws written around you but never for you, to feel the full weight of government only in the form of silence. And then he told them something few had the courage to admit. Justice isn't built in moments of comfort. It's built by the uncomfortable for the unseen. He didn't ask for applause. He asked for attention. Because the note wasn't a story, it was a standard. A line in the sand between policy and purpose. He reminded them, and perhaps reminded himself, that service without story becomes strategy. But story without service, that's just sentiment. He chose both. He lived both. And in doing so, he became more than a congressman. He became a conduit, a reminder that pain, when honored and channeled, can become the most powerful form of public service. Because the note wasn't just about law. It was about loyalty, to memory, to mission, to the people no one writes laws for, but who feel their impact the most. And standing there in a room built for deals and divisions, he brought something else, a quiet promise, that no matter how far he rose, he'd never forget the floor he started from. After that speech, something strange happened. Not applause, not headlines, but letters. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. From veterans, from teachers, from single moms and janitors and men who hadn't cried in 20 years but did when they heard his story. They didn't write to praise him. They wrote to tell him their own. I had a note like that once. One woman wrote, "My grandfather told me I was meant for more, and I've kept that napkin in my wallet since 1973. Another man wrote, "I never made it out of the neighborhood, but when you said that line about protecting people like her, I felt like someone finally understood." Mike read every letter, not as fan mail, but as confirmation that the invisible were always there waiting for someone to say what they'd been feeling. That maybe the truest leadership isn't about bold vision. Maybe it's about quiet validation. Letting people know you're not crazy, you're not alone. What you lived through mattered. Because that's what the note had done for him. It didn't fix anything. It didn't bring his mother back or change the fact that he went hungry. But it gave those wounds a shape. a frame, a reason. And once pain has meaning, it can become power. That's what he tried to pass on, not just through policy, but through posture. By walking into every room, every hearing, every committee, every closed-door negotiation with the awareness that someone out there was depending on him. Not to win, but to remember, to carry them with him even if only in silence. And when he spoke, it wasn't for applause. It was for the kid sweeping a church floor, wondering if life had anything else to offer. For the grandmother waiting 9 hours in an ER, hoping her name got called before her pulse gave out. For the single parent choosing between rent and groceries. The veteran fighting bureaucracy more than trauma. The factory worker who aged out of relevance at 47. The stories America hears and then forgets. But he didn't forget, because the note didn't let him. You must study the law to protect people like me. He once thought that was an instruction. But now standing where he stood, he saw it for what it really was. A reminder that justice is never abstract. It's always specific. A name, a face, a life that mattered. He keeps the note in his breast pocket. Even now, some days he doesn't touch it, doesn't read it, just feels its shape through the fabric like a second heartbeat. He says it's not superstition. It's alignment, a quiet compass reminding him not of where he's going, but of why he started. When reporters ask about it, he never offers a full answer. He just says it kept me moving. Because the truth is, the note didn't change his life in one moment. It changed it in 1,000 small ones. When he stayed up late, when he said no to shortcuts, when he listened more than he spoke, when he saw someone struggling and didn't look away, it shaped him into the kind of man who didn't need a crowd to do the right thing. And now he asks one thing of us, not through slogans or sound bites, but through story. Carry your own note. Find that sentence, written or unwritten, that reminds you who you promised to be. Not for fame, not for legacy, but for the people no one else will fight for. Because the world doesn't need more leaders chasing power. It needs more protectors honoring purpose. So whatever your note is, read it again. Fold it with care. Keep it close. And the next time you doubt if you're the one for the job, remember this. He opened the bag. He read the note. That night, a speaker was born. And maybe, just maybe, tonight is your night.